Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Recovery Live event. This event is brought to you by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration's Bringing Recovery Supports to Scale Technical Assistance Center strategy, otherwise known as Brass Tacks. Our TA Center is dedicated to increasing access to recovery supports, and we achieve this work through a variety of mechanisms, including a lot of technical assistance focused on systems transformation and developing the capacity of peer-run, recovery community, and family and youth-led organizations. We're very fortunate to have three just amazing presenters with us today, and they're all going to be talking about how best to support veterans in active duty military and strategies to address the challenges they endure in accessing and engaging community organizations. Now, I have to tell you all, I'm really pleased to introduce today's presenters. Donna Allegata, who is the Project Director for SAMHSA Service Members, Veterans, and Their Families Technical Assistance Center, or the SMVA-TA, and Donna is with Policy Research Associates. Our second presenter is Jeffrey McQueen, who is the Chief Program Officer for the Mental Health Association of Nassau County. And our final presenter today is Joseph Snyder, who is an expert consultant in a trauma-informed veteran peer support. Today's Recovery Live event has a slightly different format in that I will immediately begin posing some questions to the presenters to lay out the framework for discussion. And our hope is that you will be able to benefit immediately from a more robust and inclusive discussion as a result. Now, as soon as we've completed the introductory questions to our presenters, we'll then dive into questions directly from the audience. We're going to get started on that in just about 2 minutes, but first I need to review just a few housekeeping items with all of you. Recovery Live events are different from usual webinars. We want you to engage directly with our presenters and each other through the live chat box, and you will also be answering several audience poll questions, one of which is already up in the room. The presenters are going to share some of their initial thoughts, and then we'll answer questions you raised during this event. So you're going to see a lot of movement in the room, and we hope you'll find it energizing and exciting. You can share your questions and comments throughout this event. Audience members are in a listen-only mode, and they can submit questions by typing them into the Comments and Questions Here box. Now, if you experience any technical difficulties at all, please request assistance in that same box. Tech support staff are standing by, viewing comments, and they will respond to your needs, and they'll do it pretty quickly. We also have a resource that is available, and it's in the Download from Our Resources box. To download this file, just highlight the name of the document. A download button is going to light up in that box. You click the button, and the document will be sent to your computer. Now, as people were arriving today, we posted this poll question up in the room now for you all to answer. So let's just look at what the responses are really quickly. So we've got about 25% of the folks in the room are people in recovery. We've got about 7% identify as a military service member. 31% is veterans, almost 18% is military family members. Nice, we've got about 5% of folks on the call are recovery coaches. We've got 23% of folks on the call are peer support specialists. I'd love to see that there's a family peer support specialist here. A couple of them, that's fantastic. 32% are clinicians. That's fabulous as well. Nice too to see some program administrators as well as some of the big decision makers, and then we've got some folks who are just kind of interested in the topic itself, and that's at about 23%. So really a nice collection and diverse collection of folks who all are interested in supporting our veterans and active duty members and their families. So thank you for responding to that. I do want to, again, I appreciate your responses, and I'm going to ask Melissa to bring up one more poll, and this is just to really, get a feel for who's in the room with us today. So, I'll let you respond to that. I'll give you a couple of minutes to respond, and what I'll do is I'll let you know the style of today's event is really dependent on this type of participation from you. You're going to see a couple of more polls that'll come up in the room as we go through this event today, and I hope that you'll participate. It brings a lot to the presenters in understanding who's actually in the room with them. And so, the results are still coming in. A number of folks have served overseas. a number of folks. 18% have served in a combat zone. We've got a small, it looks like one or two people who are currently serving in the military, and then about 70% who have not at all served in the military. Those numbers are really encouraging because the goal really for this event is related to how the community supports out there are either used or missed by folks who could really use community support in working together to provide recovery supports to their loved ones. Today's session is being recorded. It's going to last about 1 hour exactly. If you're listening to this content and you feel your organization may need or would like some technical assistance around this or any other topic related to recovery support, please copy the link for our online TA request form from the instruction box. And all you need to do is paste that into your browser. You'll have everything you need to access TA for brass tacks. It'll take you about 5 minutes to fill out the online form. It's straightforward and pretty simple. And we'll get cooking on some technical assistance with you immediately. Now, here's the last thing before we get to the good stuff. When we close this room, a satisfaction survey is going to automatically open in your internet browser. I really appreciate it if you take just a couple of minutes. It's no more than 3 minutes to complete it. Those answers really help us, better serve you and provide a better Recovery Live experience with every opportunity. And with that, I'd like to get us started. So without further ado, presenters, here come the first questions. This first question goes to Donna. Donna, we know that active duty members, veterans, and family members have different needs than many in the civilian population struggling with behavioral health challenges. Can you talk about some of the unique needs and behavioral health challenges that our service members, veterans, and families face?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for asking. I'm passionate about this topic because my husband's a Vietnam veteran in recovery, and I myself am in recovery and a military family member. And from the perspective of my life as well as my work with the TA Center, what we're seeing over the years is an increasing number, a growing number, of veterans who are actually requiring behavioral health services and an increasing number of folks who need services, want services, and aren't having access to services, are not connecting with the help they need. In terms of the kinds of needs, we know that 20 veterans die each day from suicide. And we know that 14 of those veterans are out in our communities, and they have not, those are folks that are outside of VA care. And so for all of us, everyone in our families, our neighborhoods, it's an issue. We need to understand the needs of veterans better. Talking about the behavioral health issues, it's clear that our service members now have greater exposure and prolonged periods of time in the combat zone. They're deployed more frequently. And we know that repeated deployments and repeated trauma can lead to repeated behavioral health issues. Shorter dwell time, higher rates of, injuries from physical injuries, so there's more pain. Great issue with management. Leaves folks more susceptible to issues like substance use, opiate addiction, things of that nature. So there's higher rates of combat time for a lot of the service members who are coming back home and going back and forth. And so the risk for things like suicide, depression, the issues about the signature wounds of war that we talk about, that's a term that RAND uses, in Invisible Wounds of War is another document that people might want to look at our resources for. But post-traumatic stress disorders, co-occurring conditions related to traumatic brain injury and other physical and medical issues combined with mental health issues and different kinds of substance use. Those are all getting kind of mixed together. And so we really need a cross-system approach. It's not one system, it's multiple systems. So that's kind of a long answer. But the other thing we all need to be aware of is military children and families are in our communities, and they have moved around a lot. They've had the length of the deployment associated with someone they love have left them with some higher rates of issues, and things of the nature of folks not accessing the services because of fear, perceived perceptions about the services. We need to talk more about that, but those issues have really created a situation where people who need services aren't accessing them for lots of reasons. So there are profound needs, and there's things that we all can do, each one of us, and I hope by the end of this session of all of us talking, we're all going to walk away and say, okay, what can I do? Because there's more that we can do.
Donna, thank you. That was really fantastic. Joseph or Jeff, any additional comments on this question?
Well, it's something that I'll get into when I'm addressing where is the appropriate level of care for folks. Where do we start? Is which we've talked about, Donna and I before, the stigma, the assumptions that are coming out both from families not understanding what's going on, whether that be trauma, which is my field, or anything else. I definitely think that is a major barrier for not just individuals engaging in care or staying in some sort of care that they need, whether that be peer support or otherwise, but also for the families. How do I address what's going on? I don't know what's going on, maybe with my family member. And so that I hate to use the word enable, but it kind of enables this situation, this dynamic where the family's having problems, and that kind of, there's a confluence between that and the member that's having some sort of mental health problem. So yeah, I agree, and I appreciate what Donna does as far as families for that reason, because it obviously is an integrated approach, and I have a feeling Jeffrey can add something to that.
Yeah. We talk about like addiction being a family disease. It's extremely important that we start recognizing how other things in our society affects the society at large. And when we have family members that are deployed, whether for combat or non-combat, just the idea that a member of the household has been plucked away into an unknown area that people aren't aware what may transpire for them affects our society at large and all those who know that individual. And so one of the unique needs begins to really start standing out when we have to educate our society and our educational system regarding military culture so that they're aware that when one of the children's behaviors begin to look a little different, that it might be connected to the deployment of a brother, sister, mother, and even neighbor, and how that is affecting the household and the child at large. So, I mean, it becomes a very large approach in where we have to look at it in community base. We can't look at it as just a household or that individual family member or veteran. We have to look at it in how it affects our entire community.
Thank you. I was just thinking about what you were mentioning about the fear that people have about coming forward. And, that is such a big piece, and that's why the military culture piece does matter so much, in that sometimes it's a perception and a fear that it will harm their military career, or they'll be denied security clearance, or that people will have less confidence in them, as well as just understanding about military culture and how hard it is to come forward and ask for help and acknowledge vulnerability. We'll just go there.
Yeah, great responses, folks. Thank you. The second question that we're going to pitch out to the folks today goes to Jeff. Jeff, what are some of the greatest barriers we see preventing veterans from accessing services, and what has been proven to work in outreach and for veterans and active duty members in linking them to services?
So I think that the barriers that I see most in the work that I'm doing comes twofold. So I think the larger of the two is that there is a self-imposing stigma among our veterans and military service members who may have an other than honorable discharge. But that doesn't mean that during their time of service that they didn't incur an inner wound, or that they don't feel a particular way about the service time that they gave to our country. And so they can't just readily go to the VA, or they can't just readily go to see a veteran service organization. And so they trying to engage that population becomes even more difficult, because the discharge status oftentimes becomes their own stigma about, well, am I even a veteran at all? Because I'm not entitled to what other veterans are entitled to. And another aspect of that comes in with not wanting to appear wounded, or not wanting to appear broken. And so in my own deployment, when I came home, what I felt about what transpired over there versus what the rest of my combat members felt were two different things, you know, or at least in my eyes, right? Because we could have all come home and felt the same way, but the question is, who's going to be the first one to say, I don't feel right about what just happened, you know? And so trying to engage veterans in our community becomes this battle of its own, because we have to look at the comfort zones of what existed prior to the veterans' deployment. And I always use this status of, you know, so I'm from the baby boomers generation, and so when I came home from school, I was eager to go out and play. I couldn't wait to get home, change my clothes, and run outside. Our younger generation is a little different. Their environment and even their friends were indoors in front of a television with the gaming system playing live on their phones and computers. And so now that they've returned home, it's hard to get them out of the house because their comfort zone was initially in front of the TV. Whereas our aging veterans who served in maybe in the Cold War era or in Vietnam era, they were used to going out after having a day at home, or so coming home from school or work. So it was easier after Vietnam and the Cold War era for veterans to engage and go outdoors. But this era, it's a little more different. And these barriers are meaning that we have to become more innovative about our approach in engaging them in activities. And some of the things that we do in our community is like have gaming events, because it's a younger population and we want them to come out. If you're playing the games in your home, then we want you to play them, with us. Come out and do these competitions and get involved. And also we set up this gauntlet of information to let them know that, so we're not connected to the VA. We are a community-based organization. We can get you connected to the VA, and we wish you would. But if this is a barrier for you, then allow us to be able to service you right here in the community.
That was great, Jeff. Thank you. Donna or Joseph, any additional follow-up or response?
I did notice a question in the chat area that was addressed to the fact that I was talking a little bit about how challenging it is to access services for veterans. And there was a question about how does a veteran or advocate connect with services. And I think it's a really good question. I think we should all be aware that every state has an interagency state structure, a team. And that brings the National Guard, it brings the federal VA, the state VA, a lot of the key players and agencies together. And most of them have already inventoried the services and programs that are funded, military and civilians, and tried to create a system of services for behavioral health. So it is possible to find out in your state how to connect with that. And many of them have directories, maps, access online. The challenge we have is there's so many players entering the playing field and so many programs that it can be overwhelming and confusing. So all of us need to know how to engage people. And not every program is well vetted or has military culture training or is equal. So you have to really learn in your community about that. But there are many peers, veteran peers, military families, caregivers, who are out there in the community who can help navigate the waters. And so There's resources at the end of this webinar or this posting that we have, and we'll go over the possibilities, but people should be able to leave this discussion today with ideas about who to call.
Joe, any final comment before we move on? Joseph?
No, I'm looking forward to the next question because I think it pretty much ties up a lot what Donna and Jeffrey have been saying, and lots of parallels.
Fantastic. Well, here it is then. So, Joseph, what would be the best approach to engaging those identifying as needing mental health care or substance misuse treatment? Peer support, clinical care, AANA? What's your thoughts, Joseph?
Well, really, the answer is it actually depends. There's a few things that are of concern. Basically, I want to start off with what military service is like, what it's like coming back, and that feeds into where we're going to go. How we can guide the individual into some sort of situation that will help them cope and engage in some services that will assist them in doing that. In the military, you have a very defined role. You know what the code of conduct is. You know what your job is. You know very specifically what you're doing. It embodies who you are. It becomes your identity. And people take that with them, whether or not they go into another vocation. Say, for instance, they were a military medic like me, or they were on an aircraft carrier, and they go into marketing. There is a piece of that person that still carries that role as their identity, and why that's important is because that can create an issue of stigma within the individual. So the person, most notably malingering, within the military community, malingering is essentially your in dereliction of your duties. If you're seeking medical care, that there is a concern that you're malingering. This is something that becomes shameful. Seeking care, especially mental health care, is saying I'm going to get out of my duties. I'm not going to be there for my unit, and that can be how individuals see that. That can be how others look at the individual. Now, when we're looking at the individual and addressing that, it's noticing or asking what that assumption is, how they feel about getting care, and how can they be heard? How do they feel heard? What I've heard from guys is, in trying to understand what they want if they're having issues, is, why would I go see a psychiatrist? Why would I go see a therapist? Why would I go to the VA or the base mental health care? They don't understand. How can they understand what I went through? There's nothing wrong with me. And in fact, they're right. We can't pathologize experience. We can't tell people that there's a problem with them. And actually, the word that we're using in the military is broken. If you can't do your job, you're broken. That's the word that we use in the military for being on light and limited duty. So how does that individual feel that they can be heard is important. Now, that's where peers come in. Peers, people might feel that person can actually hear them in a way that a clinician might not be able to. maybe the stigma there, the feeling that I don't want to feel like I'm malingering. I don't want that shame. Maybe, a clinical non-peer related would be more appropriate because, this is an individual that is going to address the fact that I'm not going to be heard, but also someone that can support them in the recovery process or accessing care. And the third is AANA, which I haven't really heard thrown around as a primary method of care. But oftentimes, it's the chicken and the egg thing with dual diagnosis, which comes first. Again, within a trauma-informed model, it's client-directed care. So if the person finally comes to the realization that, hey, you know what, all this anger that I'm having, which might be a symptom of, a mental health symptom, trauma, bipolar disorder, whatever, that's being created by my drinking. My issues connecting with others and talking with them is the result of that. Now, that's important to address, in whichever method the client will engage. I definitely think, I know I'm going on and on here a little bit, but one of the things that I like to encourage other people to do and use as a lens for myself is what's causing, what is trauma, when do we know it's a problem? It's a problem when there's a lack of coping, whether it be emotional coping, the person's own individual resources to be able to manage what's going on, or other resources, family maybe, community resources. So specifically, once someone engages with whether a peer, AA, NA, we really need to have people that have some cursory knowledge of trauma and trauma-informed care, because in order for the person to be heard, in order for services to be delivered, and those may need to be clinical, we really need to accurately label what's going on. People, the psychoeducation component is paramount. People don't understand what's going on. Helping them accurately label what's happening, what's working, what isn't working, is important. Validating their experience, validating their concerns, saying that what they're experiencing isn't just pathological, what they're experiencing is a direct result of their experience, which isn't wrong. And also supporting them to accurately label these emotions, what might be called symptoms. I think that's a word that we really need to avoid. But I think that having people that have these basic cursory competencies is really important in directing people to appropriate care. But get in where you fit in is another military term for let's build coping. The client directs care. Their experience is not a pathology. It might be causing problems, but we need to see them and meet them where they're at. We need them to engage in treatment, whether it be AA, NA, peer support, or coming into a clinic.
Joseph, that was great. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just checking in with Jeff and Donna really quickly for any additional thoughts on this particular question, and then guys, we'll move right into audience questions.
I think one of the things that stands out for me with this is that if I break a finger, if I break a leg, whatever injury I may incur, it feels pretty unique to me. And I'm not so sure that everyone else is experiencing the same thing that I'm experiencing when they broke their leg or knee. And so it helps when you're able to speak with someone who has dealt with the same feelings and emotions or has been to the same place and are either even if they're still there or if they've come out of it, it's just comforting to be able to engage with someone who has that knowledge base. But it's hard to talk to someone and tell them, listen, we're here to support you and we just want to help you and da-da-da-da-da. And so we don't even use that approach. One of the biggest things that I've seen help, because we host probably 22 groups a month throughout Nassau County, peer-related for veterans. And one of the things that has seemed to fill those rooms is when we invite veterans to come support other veterans. So I'm not asking you to come get help for you. I want you to come share who you are with other veterans. And they come to the group and then they realize that it's a give-get situation, that I'm not just there to support someone else, but I realize that I got some support myself. And it builds that camaraderie that we had in the military, and it also gives us back like that buddy that we used to have as well, because we'll notice that they click and that they get comfortable with a few set people in the room, and then the magic happens after the meeting when they say, hey, let's go get coffee, or what are you doing this weekend? I want to go do such and such. And then they find themselves being together even after these meetings have gone on, right? And having meetings of their own in other places just to go bowling or to go have dinner or to go, right? And we watch the magic happen over weeks of coming to the groups where we discovered that each one is teaching one and that this peer model has provided them this safety net of not feeling that they're alone in what they're dealing with, and that there is, in fact, whether they realize what the answer is yet or not, that wasn't what was important. What really seemed to be important is that I'm not alone while I'm looking for the answer, that I'm not dealing with this by myself, that I have a team of people I can go to while I'm in this ditch, and we'll figure it out together. Because one thing we know is that we don't leave a man behind. So once they've connected, they know they're going to stay connected, that no one's going to leave them there.
That was fantastic, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you so much. Donnie?
And if I can add to that, it's a lot of times, especially whether it's when the military member first gets back or if they've been back from service, and this is more specific to maybe trauma or let's just say people that have served in combat zones, that's their experience. They're coming back and maybe initially or 10 years later, guys still don't know what's going on when they get angry. They still don't know what happens when, at night they have to drink to go to sleep. They still don't understand, what it is, what's happening. And so within the group dynamic, within the peer dynamic, it's extremely important for that, however it happens, the accurately labeling of what you're experiencing is hypervigilance, and explain why that is. But that's something that I've experienced. That normalization is incredibly validating. I'm no longer someone that's broken. I'm no longer someone that's crazy. And that gives you a clear direction as far as where you go from there. Again, I would add to that, though, for everyone here, it's also extremely important to not make this just about their trauma. We can make that about their experience, what they're experiencing now, but the people coming back don't need to feel like they need to tell you all about everything that happened, about their buddy getting blown up or whatever. And any kind of services that kind of push that that can create a situation where the person's getting triggered and they don't have the coping yet or the resources to manage that. So when we're looking, again, back to my question, when we're looking at where we're going, what is appropriate for the person, it's whatever can help them develop some sort of coping community, a way of understanding what's going on so that they can take some action, whether it's then or in the future. It's client-directed.
Well said, Joseph. Well said. Thank you. Donna?
Yeah, I was really excited to see how many people on the chat room and the list here, come from different paradigms and different backgrounds, because as Joe was talking, I was thinking now we need really good people with military lived experience who are clinicians who do peer work, but we also need our lived experience to be inclusive of the recovery. And what's been really exciting and fun is to see peers and clinicians from different paradigms work together to reach out to service members and veterans. And the important part is that none of us should feel intimidated. So I would say it's multiple pathways to recovery. It's multiple pathways to treatment. It's kind of like all of us caring enough to learn a little bit about military culture. It takes 5-10 minutes to sign on to Psych Armor's free courses and find out the 15 things every veteran wants us to know. There's things we can all do every day so that we're not afraid to reach out and talk to someone who's a military family member. It was great to see that there's people from vet centers here, people who have used adaptive parenting tools. There are best practices for this population, but not all of us are clinicians. All of us are neighbors, though. And we all can know somebody who's been deployed and reach out to that wife or husband and say, can we help with the kids? Do you need help with cutting the lawn or changing your oil? Because when someone's deployed, it's hard on the family and it's stressful for everyone. And to be welcoming to the difference. But I think we all get kind of intimidated a little bit. So I'm going to say our recovery experience, be it from alcohol or drug or trauma, that's the common ground that really does bind people who are civilian and military. We all can't say that we have combat experience or know what that's like. Some of us can. And so it's really a mix of things that need to be brought to people who are returning home and trying to transition.
And Donna, I think that there's a lot of pressure on people when a military service member returns to the community. The family is experiencing, the military member is experiencing some concerns, some symptoms. What do I do with that? I don't know. The family member might feel, I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. I don't want to hurt the person. I don't want to. I don't know. Basically, I just don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything.
Mention that because I think we need to not forget about military families because they need us to reach out and to help them to know what support there is and what's right in their community. That there are people who've been where they've been. So military families reaching out to other military families, just like veteran to veteran, it does work.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, those were just powerful responses, folks, and I want to thank everybody for the introductory part of this here. What I'm going to do right now is move over to some of the audience questions, and when I'm doing that, I'm going to actually have Melissa pull up another poll in our chat room here, or in our big group here. And if you guys can just take a moment and fill this out, I'm going to kind of move into the questions, and I'm going to leave this poll up here for a bit. So we have a number of questions. Let me share this one. Donna mentioned the inability for those in need to connect with services. How does a vet or an advocate for a vet connect with services, and what are the most needed services? And I'm opening that up to any of the presenters to respond.
I think that the needs are, I don't think there's a cookie cutter model here. I don't think that every veteran needs the same thing. I think it's important to allow the individuals that we're working with to determine what's going on in their lives, and as professionals that gives us kind of an idea of what direction it is that they're needing to go in, and what services would benefit them with what they're stating they don't have or what they need. think there's one particular thing that exists. I mean, if I'm working with a homeless veteran, then obviously the primary is he's going to need a residence. I don't think he wants to talk about going to see a doctor when he doesn't have anywhere to lay his head. So I think it just determines on the individual and what the primary is in that particular moment.
This is Donna.
Great, Jeff. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I was saying I like what Jeff's saying, and that it's not one shoe fits all, and we have to meet people where they're at. But sitting down and talking about what their experiences is, where their needs are, what they're struggling with. Sometimes we'll come away understanding that they need a place to live or employment, or having trouble with money is a big one. But sometimes there are other issues. There's a lot of women veterans, a lot of military sexual trauma issues. And so it is important to give folks a chance to identify some of the needs, but always remembering that in terms of some of the issues that we see, let's use employment as an example, multiple deployments and misconceptions about PTSD and TBI, the whole transition from a military culture and military skills to a civilian life, it's not easy. And there's really a need to acknowledge that some of the wages that got paid before, things that folks have wonderful skills, but they're not always easy to transfer over. So there are unique needs and there are some gaps, and we do need to be thinking about this with partners. So that is why it's so important to take a look at what's in your community. There are navigators, there's maps, there's already folks out there who are specialized in this. The vet centers got mentioned, but there's some folks who can really help, even folks who've been dishonorably discharged. There's a whole network of services developing in communities now. So I would suggest that everyone think about where they live and get really familiar with what that looks like where you are. And if you don't have an idea about that, we have, SAMHSA has an SMD-FTA center, and we have maps and we have contacts in every state, and we can help introduce you into a warm handoff if you don't know who's doing what in your vicinity. We don't know everything, but we'll get you started.
Joseph, any final thoughts?
I think she summed it up better than I could.
Fabulous, fabulous. And we'll move on. As a homeless service, as an upcoming homeless service to veterans in our community, how can we begin the entry process for substance misuse or mental health challenges for our veterans?
Well, I've worked on the community level on an integrated trauma service team. And again, I will reference the chicken and the egg. So is this a substance use disorder compounding a mental health problem, or is it the mental health problem that the person is utilizing some sort of substance to manage? Where I mentioned earlier that what we're calling pathology is the lack of resources to manage what's happening or what has happened. Substance is one of those things that works, but it causes problems. It works in the immediate time. It doesn't work for someone's life. It doesn't make things better. It doesn't address what's really happening. So I think going into treatment or being a treatment provider, it's extremely important to help the member understand what it is and help them accurately label what really is the problem. Why are we using in order to cope? And validate that. I think that's paramount to making progress post substance abuse treatment, and maybe in tandem, evidence-based treatment says that needs to be in tandem with some sort of emotional, peer, or clinical treatment. So, the common conception is that once the substance is taken away, once that coping is taken away, it's very difficult for people to cope with everything else emotionally, and it's coming up that they've used drugs and alcohol to to treat. And so we need to understand how to help people understand that.
I was going to say that the VA, HRSA, and SAMHSA all have fabulous toolkits and actually TA centers and resource centers. And if people want to go online there, they can just tap into it, and you will see for homeless veterans, there's quite a bit of work being done at SAMHSA, and I think there will be there's also locators for people to help connect.
Jeffrey, any final thought before we move on to the next question?
They pretty much wrapped it up for me.
Fantastic. Thank you. This is an interesting one, folks. As a family organization, I'm sorry.
I
Joe?
just wanted to make sure that we're all clear on the coping as far as using substance. That not being the goal.
Understood.
That's the coping that does not work, and the one that we're understanding is what clinicians would call pathological. It's not working. It's not helping. It's hurting, but it makes sense. It's a response. It's a reasonable response for someone that doesn't have other methods of coping. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I didn't know if it was that was understood.
Can I add something to that real quick, Stephen?
Sure. Sure.
I think it's important that we understand that a traumatic event, or what appears traumatizing for an individual, is when an event or an extenuating event supersedes my ability and my resources to deal with it, right? So if something occurs, I internally begin to fight back against it. And when what occurred is stronger than my own resources, trauma occurs. And so because of my need to survive, I begin to look for ways to cope. And if I didn't have anything internally that could sustain it, then I'm going to look for something externally to help me sustain it. And oftentimes an immediate fix becomes alcohol or drugs, right? And the bad sign is we know what comes out of that. The good side is that my use of it is a real strong indication of my desire to survive.
Yeah, and right, that brings us back to getting away from this pathology orientation. I don't really have to tell some of you peers that, but I definitely think as clinicians, labeling the problem and telling the client what the problem isn't the solution.
Well, I'm going to put in here, as a person in long-term recovery from alcohol and other drugs and from trauma, and let you know that treatment works and recovery works and peer support works. And I think there's a lot of hope in this picture, and I want to say that what you're both saying I agree with, but maybe the number one thing that's missing is an individual owning their own recovery and setting their own recovery action plan. And, there's tools for that as well. And so I have to say ownership of your own healing process is so central. That's all the missing piece that I haven't heard us talking about.
That's fantastic, guys. I know this is a conversation that really requires additional time, and I want to try and get to one other question that I think will kind of bring us back to the sort of community focus that I really am want to make sure that we convey today. And here's the question: as a family-run organization, I'm interested in suggestions on how to engage parents who are active service or veterans who have children that have special needs or also may need service to help them process challenges based on trauma. We provide services to many families. However, I would be interested in learning additional ways to engage these families. Some struggle with accessing services outside of the VA.
Well, I would say the Children's Military Traumatic Stress Network has a fabulous website, resources, everything from Sesame Place for military families. There's just so many tools and so many best practices there. I'd be very happy to provide the link, the contact, and I think there'd be no trouble at all. SAMHSA supports those initiatives. There's a lot we can learn about children of non-deployed parents as well as folks who've been deployed. And, you know, they do have youth with 2 or more family deployments have a higher rate of substance use. So they are high risk for certain things, and I think we do have opportunities and lessons learned about that. I think there's some parenting tools that people can learn about. So I don't think we can cover everything now, but I'd be happy to make sure that that's made available through breast tax.
Fabulous. And thank you for that, Donna, very much. Other thoughts?
I don't have a whole lot of experience with that, but I think Donna covered that pretty eloquently.
Fabulous, fabulous. Jeffrey, any final thoughts from you?
So I think that when services are required or a connection of services, I think that we're constantly innovating who we are as community-based organizations. And I'm never sure when someone has began a new program or when, you know, and so I think that it's just to not leave no stone unturned and to ask the question, you know, because like we have a resource guide with the Veterans Health Alliance of Long Island, and it's obsolete in 90 days. You know, we're going back over that resource guide every 90 days, every 45 days, adding and taking things away because the community-based organizations are constantly doing new things and changing and evolving. And so it's just really about not leaving any stone unturned and not thinking that there's one way to skin the cat, so to speak. You just have to be very diligent about continuously seeking what's in your community, because what wasn't there yesterday could be very well opening right now.
Jeffrey, that's fantastic, and that's a great segue into this final question, because I know we're going to run out of time here, and I'll need a couple of minutes to close. But this question, I think, really kind of gets at, you know, basically everything we've talked about. So let me read it to you. As a combat veteran, I completely understand that the circumstances leading to service member or veteran mental health challenges and or addiction may be different. But are the treatments really that different? I'm not a clinician, but I'm pretty sure that the modalities of treatment for mental health, depression, PTSD, and addiction remain largely the same for vets and non-vets. Are we then doing the community a disservice by implying that treatments for veterans have to be so unique? What do you guys think?
Absolutely, 100% agree that having worked with both, that they are not so different. And we do ourselves a disservice by trying to make this a little bit more complicated or sound more complicated. As far as what people experience, what we'll call symptoms, they're the same. How that affects their lives as far as maladaptive coping, you know, most notably substance use, is the same. How that affects their family, as far as, you know, their anger, is the same. We could keep going on and on. And I will tell you that a lot of the treatment modalities also are the same. The cultural conditions are important to understand, and it's also important to not invalidate the experience, or to say that someone's experience in the military was pathological itself, that it wasn't normal for someone to come out of this having these difficulties. So overall, I agree with that. I don't think that we need to make this more complicated, and we don't need to completely remove military trauma and trauma responses from those of others. Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be.
That's great, Joseph. Thank you. Thank you so much. Donna or Jeff?
Yeah, I have that view, but maybe I just want to raise this. With every culture, we can't assume that everything we do it the same way and it works the same way. And there are some lessons learned, fabulous lessons learned that the federal VA has learned over the years. The Department of Defense has learned in terms of the Center for Deployment Psychology and others. They've worked very hard with this population, and there's certain things that we know work better or not based on culture, based on the type of trauma. It's not all created the same. Not all trauma is the same. There's many common features. So there are some models that are specialized, actually. But what I guess I like about what Joe's saying is, basically, cognitive behavioral techniques, whatever the general techniques are for trauma, they're the same. But there are some folks that need more specialized services, and we need to know when to connect with the system that can do the best work with certain individuals. So I guess the thing I'd like to raise is not all insurances are the same, not all systems are the same, so we can't assume that everyone in the community can do the same job with every client. So we really do have to allow veterans to have a choice, have military families have a choice, and let them know what their options are so that they can pick whether they want to go to someone who hasn't got the background that they might be looking for or may not know the specialized approaches. But there are some things that are very common because people are people.
Right, and I was referring more to the treatment and what we're looking at as far as symptoms and approaches. Survivor guilt is definitely something that's a problem within the military community, especially getting treatment. You'll hear over and over from guys, I know someone that has it way worse. I don't have a problem. I don't have a physical ailment. I have all of my legs. I don't need treatment. Those guys need treatment. Of course, those and other barriers are in the experience, unique experience of service members is different. When it comes down to it, we don't need to overcomplicate or handicap ourselves by saying that the evidence-based practices that we have need to change.
Joseph, fantastic. Jeff, you've got about 30 seconds for a final response. What do you think?
Not a problem. I oftentimes believe that that recovery is the gateway to an individual receiving treatment versus treatment being the gateway to someone's recovery. It's my desire to have my life back and live that guides me to this place where I begin to start seeking help. And so the door of hope has to remain open, and while the treatments may look very similar or the same, individuals are unique and different in their own rights. Mm-hmm. And this is why care has become person-centered. And so what I provide may be relatively the same, but who I provide it to and the way I administer it to each individual is definitely unique.
That was spectacular. Agreed. And all three of you presenters, we're at the end of the Recovery Live event today. I want to thank each one of you. You guys are amazing. And I know we could have done 8 hours of a Recovery Live event, and we would not have addressed all the questions and the issues that are coming up in front of us. So, presenters, thank you very much for the participants that are here. We're so glad that you could come today and participate. We've got a document pod right now. Melissa has pulled up the document that is in that pod, and as you can see, there are some resources there. We'd like you to, just pay attention to that, download it, take it, use those resources, and understand that supporting our service members, our veterans and their families, it's a critically important component of the transition back to home and civilian life. And the issues and strategies that to address their needs is really a priority for us. Now, before everybody runs back to their daily demands, and I get, folks are really busy, please be advised there's going to be a link that will pop up to the satisfaction survey when I close this online meeting room. It'll take you less than 3 minutes to complete. We hope you'll give us feedback on our presentation today because your comments and suggestions are really important. If you have additional questions, put them in the satisfaction survey, and feel free to reach out to Brass Tacks TA with us at any time. Thank you all for staying with us, and I hope you all have a great afternoon. Take care now.